Carlos and Wendy are very likable people. Carlos comes from Brazil, and he's a hardcore businessman. Wendy comes from China. She is a very proud engineer. And I met them both a couple of years ago here in Mannheim when I was lecturing in my cross-cultural negotiation program. And we typically start with a couple of games to break the ice. The game that we typically do at the beginning is I give a couple of students coins, 10 euros in €1 coins. And since Carlos and Wendy were sitting next to each other, I offered them to be part of the game. And the game is very easy. One person, in this case Carlos, holding the coins, makes to the other person, in this case Wendy, an offer by moving either 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 9 or 10 coins to the other party. Both are not supposed to speak with each other. And then it's up to Wendy, in this case, to decide whether she wants to take the offer or not. If both agree on a deal, they would keep the money, otherwise the money comes back to me. Typically, only a little amount of money comes back to me. Yeah? In this case, Carlos has chosen to give Wendy €1. She accepted the offer, and when I asked Carlos why he thought so, that this would be an appropriate offer, he clearly said, Wendy had nothing, and just getting €1 is a gift. When I told Wendy, how do you feel about it? And she said, yeah, it's okay. I'm not sure when you hear this from your partner or your spouse at home. Yeah, okay, in my case means I'm in deep shit. Yeah. The same was the case with Carlos and Wendy. When I was just looking after a couple of minutes to the first row where they were sitting, suddenly there was one space between the two. Yeah, I thought, okay, maybe a tough experience. And half an hour later, there have been 2 seats between the two. Yeah? And I said, hey, it was just a game, just €1. Don't worry too much. Human being will continue to exist. Yeah. And after the lunch break, 3 seats, like between the two of you. So I hope you don't have any arguments. And what obviously happened there was a kind of emotional conflict. Yeah. Wendy felt being treated unfair. Yeah. Fairness in negotiations, but in any kind of interactions between human beings, is a core concern. Yeah? If people are not treated fairly, they quickly run into emotions. And the tricky thing with emotions is that people typically believe that emotions are controlled by the rational way of thinking. But the matter of the fact is exactly the opposite. It is the emotion that changes the way how we perceive the world and how we take decisions. Studies have been taken where people have been shown boxes of cigarettes with these ugly images and the text on that, smoking kills or smoking causes cancer. And both smokers and non-smokers have been asked, is this a message that scares you? And both of them said yes. And the same set of people have been put into MRTs where brain activity is monitored. And as the study has proven for the non-smokers, indeed, the center in the brain that deals with worries and concerns was pretty active. But showing the same kind of message to smokers and looking to brain activities, it's easily to be found out there's actually no activity in the center that deals with fear, but there is a whole lot of a party going on in the center of lust. Yeah? So there is a lot of joy, and obviously that is one of the reasons why it's so difficult for smokers to basically stop doing so, because rationally they understand, but it is the emotion, the feeling of lust in this case, that triggers the decision to take another cigarette, even though everybody clearly understands this is not a wise thing to do. If you look to the journeys of decision-making and the emotions, some of you may have seen the Pixar movie Inside Out, where a girl with her family moves from Canada to the Americas, and along those trips, basically you see 2 stories. One of which is a story about a little girl, how she kind of started to make friends in a very different environment. And the other story is the emotions in the head. So if you haven't seen it, please take the time, because it explains a lot about human thinking and decision making. The big 5 are basically angry. You are angry. You have fear. There is disgust. You have joy, or you're sad. And whatever your emotional state or the state of the other party is, that will influence your decision. Yeah? If you are very sad, you are unlikely to take risks. You are unlikely to get active. Yeah? If you are angry, you are very easily willing to take high risks in negotiations, which may come to a disadvantage. However, strong emotions, they narrow your perception about the options, the number of issues at the table, you don't fully see them, and you get more and more worried about what is the right thing to do, and you lose out opportunities. And why is this happening? It is typically happening because people believe a negotiation as a zero-sum game. Whatever I win, the other person will lose it. And the core of their understanding in negotiation is that the negotiation is a battle of will. Yeah? So in the case of Wendy and Carlos, it was the question who gets more of the 10 euros. Yeah? This is not the case. Negotiations are typically not a zero-sum game. There are a few situations, but in general, is the negotiation the art of creating value by combining different skills or assets or capabilities. The example given is the example here in this case of two sisters arguing for an orange. The typical response for fair distribution of the orange would be split it into parts, give either of the sisters one half of the orange. But if you dig deeper and start to understand the other party, you would basically try to understand what is the need, what is the interest in the orange. Yeah? And in this case, it's an easy one. One sister wants to make orange juice, and the other one wants to have the outer part of this orange to make some cake. Yeah? And once you understand interest, you come to much better outcomes. And while the former example of the 10 euros being split was an example of value distribution and competitive negotiations, the latter with the oranges was the example of cooperative negotiations. What I would recommend to every negotiator, try to seek for opportunities to extend the value by having a deeper understanding of interest, because negotiation is the art of creating and appreciating value. In order to be able to create and appreciate value, there is process competency required. Yeah? Negotiation in the easiest form has three phases. The preparation phase, where you firstly seek to understand what is your own interest, what do you really want to have, what are your alternatives, who are the stakeholders at the table, what might be their interests, and what they might be their alternatives to the negotiation at the table. You decide whether you want to have a cooperative negotiation or whether you want to be competitive, whether they're going to be alliance partners. And once you enter the negotiation with the other party, you better do so well prepared to have a clear understanding where you are, what your interests are, and where you want to go. And based on that, you jointly exchange information on a reciprocal basis in order to get a deep understanding of the other party's interest, and by that develop the zone of possible solutions, of zone of possible negotiation results. And once you have done that, you only start to make the first offer, which is called anchoring. And with anchoring, you need to be a bit careful, because people typically have difficulties to move away from the anchor. When you make a too high anchor or get anchored too high, it's difficult for you to accept lower bids. Yeah? So when the first offer was €1, in the next round, €5 would be very confusing. And if you have no perception what a fair anchor is, you get easily drawn away by that. Yeah, sooner or later, with the interactive bidding going forth and back and a continued sharing of information, you come to the closure phase. And most people party themselves than having signed a contract. But as I always remind my business partners and my students, a signed contract is nothing but a piece of paper. Till that point of time, you have chosen whether you made friends and partners with your negotiating counterparts, or whether you're going to be in a more difficult and envy situation. The value creation starts only after the contract, when it goes to the implementation phase. And here again, humanity becomes very relevant, because the sheer effect of the process in the Western world is one where one thing happens after the other. In the case of Carlos, he is doing multiple things at the same time. He would argue on different levels and different arguments, very confusing for a European. Yeah? In contrast, Wendy would potentially be very reactive in just listening to the offers being provided by Carlos. And while Carlos may believe that he has all the speaking and can print out his strong arguments, and having no response from a reactive culture like China, where Vivendi comes from, this may result in a very big misunderstanding whether there is agreement. And then when it comes to the implementation and the realization of value, Carlos may find out that he had no agreement. And silence in this case didn't mean agreement, but something very, very different. And here, I guess it's important to understand what is your role as a negotiator. What I typically remind my students, but also my colleagues and business partners, the most important currency in your life, be it in personal life or in professional life, is your credibility. That is the foundation. If your credibility had been destroyed by cheating other people, that is going to become a public information in today's society, where we are all interlinked on Facebook, on LinkedIn, where you know who knows whom, and before you get in interaction with somebody, we speak with a trusted party who knows also the person to understand what is the credibility of this person. Yeah. So please be very serious with your credibility. And obviously you don't need to run naive into negotiations, but please don't try for the benefit of getting a bit of a smarter deal, kind of jeopardize your entire career and credibility and coming out with false information. Negotiators typically run into negotiations and shooting out their arguments, which I believe is a big mistake. You come in, you settle yourself as a credible business partner, and based on that, in the next step, you develop what is called pathos from Aristotle. Yeah? So ethos is yourself, and pathos is the counterpart. You start to understand what is the interest of the other party at the table. What are they really after? What is motivating them? What is driving them? You validate all the information you collected in the preparation phase by talking with the other person. You ask questions. Why is that important for you? Yeah. What are the implications? Would it be appropriate to accept proposals like this from my side? If not, what are the worries behind it? You need to develop a deep understanding, which is the pathos. And based on the pathos, you build on top your argument, which is the logos. Yeah? And all of that needs to be contextualized where you currently are, under which stress conditions your counterparty is, which is called agora, place and time, and you need to keep the balance. Yeah? You are well advised in those situations as a negotiating partner to really figure out what is the other party's interest, what is their emotional state. And if you're a bit uncertain about your own emotional state, you just step back a bit and you listen to yourself. How do I feel at the moment? Am I angry? Am I worried? Am I sad? Yeah. If you wonder what the other person's feeling is, typically you already feel it yourself, because we humans are made to connect and wire, right? You typically feel the other party's emotion and you wonder where the emotion is coming from, but frequently it's coming from the other party. And that is what you establish with strong pathos, that you have those connections to get those feelings, and then you can start to moderate them before they get too strong and you end up like Wendy and Carlos sitting at very different ends at the bench. In the specific case of the two, I luckily was able to manage the situation and basically created an environment where the two of them could actually become friends again. I said, okay, why wouldn't you now kind of excuse yourself, Carlos? Obviously, it's not worth to ruin your relationship because of a little game like that. And if you go and excuse yourself, you do it in a way that you're very honest. You don't explain and justify your own behavior. You just apologize for what happened and try to express what you understand, how this might have felt to the other person, and you show clear regret. And then preferably you do something together as a team where you have a joint experience about accomplishing something else to fix the relationship again. In my case, I experience negotiations as a journey. Yeah, in a world where you have on a permanent basis to reinvent value and to reinvent your own position, yeah, you have on a constant basis to interact with new people which you haven't met before. You need to understand how they can contribute to new product designs, to new services. You complement that. by doing a negotiation journey, and you overcome obstacles that you may have seen on the way to go to the next level. And by doing so, step by step, you develop not only personal relationships and you develop friendships, but you also create value for your own organization, for your own life, and for your own family. And as the picture shown here, there are many things and many kind of heights which you can't get to without other parties. The entire world and the entire life that we live in is a permanent matter of negotiations. And here it's important that you get skilled in those negotiations and use the opportunities not to cheat other people, but rather to create value and find ways of fair distribution of the value. And that, in essence, would be my talk for today. So thank you very much for listening to me.